Hey, good morning, America. It's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb, riffing on, looks like it's August 10th, which I believe is a Thursday at 9:40 a.m. my time. The year is 2023. And I wonder sometimes if I should change my introduction to like somebody like Justin Hawkins. Justin Hawkins rides again. To try to build an audience. So if you're watching these things and you're kind of grooving on what I'm saying and you know what I'm talking about, please like, please subscribe, please share. Like your life depends on it. Like the democracy of the United States depends on it. Even though we lost the democracy a long time ago, and it's all of a sudden it's all bullshit in terms of what's coming down the pike on mainstream media. But look, man, I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm an independent producer. I'm a dude that went the distance for America. And like that Cake song, I'm not going to stop. I'm going the distance because it's just way too evident that I have to. I don't have a choice. It's like, destiny's forcing me down this path. And, trust me, I really wish I wasn't in this path. But at the same time, I'm reminded of really so many different elements of my life. And this has been kind of happening to me to a lot recently, where I can remember moments where I was like in grade school, where I stood up for somebody on the playground and I got into a fight with like three bullies and really pounded them in front of the whole school. And, learned a big lesson that, if you want glory, you got to fight for it. And that wasn't the first and only time I'd been in a situation like that. And but I've always been on the side of the good, the righteous, good versus evil, liberty and justice for all. I ended up studying political science, and I ended up becoming a producer. And then, just because the world forced me down this path, I became a investigator and an investigative journalist. And let me tell you, that's a whole lot harder than anything else I've ever done in my life. But I've spent the last 13 years getting the truth and understanding how the power of this country works and who they are and what they've done and what it's all about. And it's antithetical to everything 99% of you think we are. We're not a democracy. We're not even remotely a democracy. Now all the buffoons on the right, are going to say, well, we're a representative republic, and that's the way it was designed, and that's the constitutionality of it all. And then they'll basically pull a smoke and mirrors. It's like, yeah, rule by the minority. Bullshit. It's to a large degree that's what it was, but we've broken through a lot of those things over the course of 100 years, and we're 247 years old, and I mean there's a lot that's gone on in that time period that is part and parcel to this sort of this amalgamation of in order to form a more perfect union. And as anybody knows who's over a certain age, none of us are perfect. None of us will ever be perfect. The world will never be perfect. But there is a big, big, big difference between tyranny and the facade of what we're all haggling over, in this sort of identity politics arena of reaction and over the top sort of scenarios that are extremely important in a lot of ways, but at the same time miss the point. So, look, the bottom line is, the fundamentals and the foundational principles of the United States have been perverted and completely betrayed by a systemology of power that understands methodologies that you don't. And I do. And I do because I've spent 13 years doing this and millions of dollars to be able to get the education and a front row seat and the evidence necessary that crosses the T's and dots the I's of something that I couldn't get out to the public in the arena without being sued into oblivion had we not done all the appropriate work, which is the sum total of what the entirety of media and our government has hid from you. We live in an era of nauseating, insane, Machiavellian, super vertical lies and deception to make sure that you do not understand the information that I have handed you on a platinum platter that may as well be, and I'll use a biblical reference not to compare myself to Moses, but it's the fucking tablets, man. Because everything that we're in the midst of right now with Donald Trump demonstrates that the government is demonstrating what's illegal in the 78 indictments and more to come on Donald Trump. And I'll just name a few. And I've done this before, but I've got to do it again. So first and foremost, the ultimate sort of full scope of this is that Donald Trump defrauded the United States. And he did. And he did. And the irony is here that actually Donald Trump, in my opinion, didn't, because he's not the brainchild of what happened. I'm sure he added a lot of things I'm about to delve into, but he didn't create this entire racket. Donald Trump is an opportunist and somebody who knows how to play the game at certain levels, from cheating and all of these things he's done for literally decades that demonstrate now have always been illegal. So the question is, well, why is it happening now? Why did suddenly the government of the United States find the commitment to its foundational principles to hold power to account? Well, those are a lot of questions that we could go, probably spiral into hours and hours of dialogue. But the long and the short of it is that the charge is Donald Trump defrauding the United States. So let's just look into a couple of things that are kind of top of mind that have been all over the map that demonstrate exactly what I'm telling you, except that in my case, I revealed to you what actually our financial system did, that I'll reveal to you now, completely owns the United States, completely pulled a hostile takeover of the United States, which was the true coup d'etat in 2009. And I know exactly how they did it. And I know exactly what they've been getting away with ever since. And it's not rocket science, it's racketeering, which, as we've seen demonstrated by the Department of Justice, is illegal. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest pet peeves at the moment is that mainstream media has, for the most part, for the course of the last, decade and a half maybe, basically tried to suppress any sort of dialogue about conspiracy. It's always conspiracy theory, right? But of course, they're all in on Donald Trump's conspiracy to defraud the United States. Yeah, because we're going to spend a shit ton of time dangling this out to get everybody's attention, to create more and more eyeballs. And it's the actual business model of mainstream media, of which recently Fox revealed in its settlement with Dominion based on the misinformation that it provided about the voting booths that led to the insurrection and everything else, of the so-called big lie that Rupert Murdoch had revealed during a subpoena questionnaire was, yeah, our business model is to lie. And then you see it all over Twitter or X now, where everybody affiliated with the right or Donald Trump or anything to that degree, specifically through Fox and Laura Ingraham and that sort of thing, or Sean Hannity, that's all they do 24/7 is lie. And I think they should all, quite frankly, be at some point, if the DOJ had probably a much bigger arsenal than it does, be able to take a dragnet, and maybe this is going to come downstream, but they're all guilty of conspiring to defraud the United States because they're using intentionally misinformation that's libel to tell a story. Because they're all in on trying to outrun the law to get their guy to become an autocrat, to basically blow up the Department of Justice and destroy the law forever. But the law has been destroyed for a very long time. It's almost like death rattle of the Department of Justice doing what is low-hanging fruit in the case of Donald Trump. So what we're going to see today and the next day and many others as we get into the grand jury with DA Fani Willis down in Atlanta is, okay, she's going to lay out RICO, racketeering, influence, corrupt organization, as it relates to get me the 11,000 votes in Florida and everybody who was involved with it, which is also an extension of the election certification documentation fraud for the Electoral College, that there were 13 charges, felony charges, or 16 last week out of Michigan. Okay, so again, the government is demonstrating that racketeering is an appropriate indictment of Donald Trump and what he did to steal the election in Atlanta or Georgia, and then also out of Michigan, the conspiracy to use documentation fraud, which is a deceptive action practices built into defrauding the United States to steal the Electoral College by using fake electors. Okay. Now, in addition to those two crimes that the government is, of course, illustrating, then what we've heard over and over and over is that the Department of Justice, through Jack Smith, had discovered the criminal fraud exception that the attorneys for Donald Trump are lying in court. And oh, yeah, by the way, Judge Eileen Cannon potentially, and it's pretty obvious from where I'm sitting, but has a conflict of interest at the very least, but I think is completely co opted and knows where she's taking her, marching orders from because of who put her in power. And this is, a sort of right wing next level coup d'etat after the insurrection to be able to get Donald Trump forward to hopefully, in their case, win so they can basically subvert, as the executive of the executive branch, the president, the Department of Justice. Okay? But there's more, right? So let's count it out. We have documentation. We have liars, attorneys lying in court. We have a judge that is actually basically being impugned for her integrity impugned because she might have a conflict of interest and be serving something other than the law. And then in addition to all of the, high level top secret clearance information and, what am I missing here? Of course, all of the things that were going on in New York with Alvin Bragg and hush money payments and, all sorts of lying there, which is illegal, of course, as it relates. And this is kind of, I think, the funniest part of it, comedic sort of, an antidote, which is, he didn't have to do it under the statutes of how, what am I trying to think of? When you have Citizens United and dark money, there's all sorts of techniques that they didn't have to reveal who they were writing the checks to get an outcome. Okay, I mean that's part and parcel to the statutes of what was achieved through Citizens United, which was the final, nail in the coffin, quite frankly, of democracy because we just made corruption legal to a degree, but obviously you can prove certain things based on deceptive acts and practices and massive cons and everything that I'm demonstrating to you that the government is demonstrating to us. And that if you can keep track of all of this stuff, right? And then in addition, but what will become the most telling is, of course, all of the civil litigation coming out of the New York AG's office against the Trump business model that will reveal time and time and time and time again that his entire business model was fraud. Deceptive acts and practices, which was control fraud, which could be criminal. It could be investigated and indicted based on RICO statutes as well. But they're just sticking with the civil stuff. In that particular case, don't know exactly why. But at the same time, I mean, just a sampling of this is that Donald Trump would increase the square footage of his house and increase the appraisals of his penthouses to get in buildings to basically get more and more loans that he used in a control fraud scenario, and not to mention he was, involved with laundering money and his involvement with Deutsche Bank, which is a direct correlate or continuity to Vladimir Putin. And I'll go one-on-one with Matt Taibbi and Russell Brand and any of these jokers who want to try to kind of erase Russiagate just because of the stupid Steele dossier and the Clinton situation. That has nothing to do with the direct sort of connection between Deutsche Bank that connects Trump and Putin, let alone all of the other guys that they've been involved with. And of course, we've seen over the course of the last, week and a half, we're seeing everybody from Ted Cruz saying, oh my God, the the suspicious activity reports from banks didn't reveal to the Department of Justice that Hunter Biden was involved with a kind of a laundering deal in a quid pro quo scheme based on Burisma and their involvement in Ukraine and everything that reveals. And they start talking about $20 million is like the crime. If you see some of these X tweets by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who looks shorter and shorter to me, which is hilarious considering her bloviating big mouth. But she is just a tiny structure person, which makes a lot of sense. She's a female version of Napoleon. She's got a Napoleon complex. And you know what? Maybe she's a guy. She reminds me of Mr. And I posted this yesterday, Mr. God, what is his name? Winkle from, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Finkel, I guess his name is. The extra point kicker that laces out and all of that ridiculous stuff. But, enough about, trying to slam on Marjorie Taylor Greene. But again, if you're tracking all the way through this, you get to the point where you realize, okay, there's just the entirety of Donald Trump is a con. And he has been for, by the way, decades. And if you go back to his involvement, not just with the 5 mob families in Manhattan and all of the different grift and tax stream scenarios, or I should say, tax evasion sort of scenarios, but he was involved because it's just the way the business worked in Manhattan, really since the 70s, that, yeah, you got to play ball with the mob to get anything done. And oh yeah, that's what he did. Okay, so there's been a definitely dark money apparatus in the United States from its inception, and by the way, that does correlate and it's been deeply involved with our intelligence state for really our entire lives. Going to Bobby Kennedy telling the world, "Oh yeah, the CIA murdered my uncle." Okay, yeah, there's that. But you know what? Going back to Trump and everything that's on display, again, the conspiracy that Donald Trump was in his world, because he's such a buffoon, was the wag the dog guy. He was the face. Look, this full-on right-wing sort of galvanization, hijacking of the United States to create a Confederate sort of government 2.0 has been at play since the Jim Birch Society back in the 50s, and long before that through Jim Crow and everything else. These guys are diabolical villains, and they've been going after this the whole time. You've got the Koch brothers, and then it skewed into more billionaires, and Sheldon Adelson and his whole deal with settlers in Israel, providing $20 million to Trump. And then you go into, the Mercers and Cambridge Analytica, which I think is all over, basically X these days, because you can see billionaire bosses that are operating like the Russian trolls did in 2016. And, they've taken over all of social media. But I'm using social media to try to get the message out to you of this corollary of what we're dealing with, so that you understand who I am and what I'm trying to do to break through to your conscious and your knowledge base, to understand that they're pissing on your head telling you it's rain because they think you're some kind of new fool, because most of you are tools in the fool circus. I consider MAGA the zombie apocalypse. I don't think all of MAGA are Nazis. I think there's a lot of good, genuine people that are white people that got fed up with the whole Democratic, Wall Street run machine over the course of the last 4 decades, this neoliberal, NAFTA globalism sellout on behalf of Wall Street's financialization of the world, that ultimately, destroyed us because they killed the golden goose and there's no equilibrium. So you got to create this debt machine that creates debt traps that when you get into the underbelly of it all, you find out through our work, because I found out from the best, William K. Black, who was like the Michael Jordan of criminology, that taught us control fraud. And the CEOs, through what we call modern executive compensation, can use perverse tactics through what we call Gresham's dynamic, which is a psychological, let's call it Goebbels-like sort of complicity racket, to be able to use the number of the incentives to get everybody in the food chain to lie for an outcome. Honestly, for increasing the facade of profits in this fictionalized economy that's not capitalism. Oh yeah, it's money that gets through the system, but how does money get through the system, and where does it come from, to what end? It's all a fucking facade. And I'll circle back to that point, to close out, but ultimately, every single thing that we see in the Trump scenario, I have proved to you in our work, The Con, at www.thecon.tv. That includes magnitudes larger documentation fabrication, where tens of millions of illegal docs got into the system through what we call liar's loans that blew up the entirety of the system, that went from a $4.6 trillion housing market to a $600 to $800 trillion Ponzi scheme derivatives corollary that blew up in 2008, that when it all collapsed based on all of these things that I just demonstrated, the government is demonstrating as it relates to Donald Trump through what we call deceptive acts and practices, where lies that are illegal and felonies under civil rights violations were used to basically generate loan after loan after loan, that Wall Street was using Gresham's dynamic on behalf of the CEOs of Wall Street through this control fraud Ponzi scheme to hyperinflate assets to basically be able to sell on the open market through that were just lies that blew up the world. And everybody seems to think that they know what they're talking about, especially, the assholes that, I'm going to call them assholes. Jimmy Dore, you're a freaking fool. You don't know shit. And then I could go on to Russell Brand. Dude, Russell Brand, you're just MAGA bait, dude. I used to have so much respect for you, and your great awakening is just fucking bullshit. Your internal guys are just a bunch of freaking dirtbags like everybody else in mainstream media that you pretend to be against. You're just playing your own version, and you don't have the answers, dude. You're smart enough to get them, but you've never slowed down enough to be able to understand what we show you exactly in the con at www.thecon.tv. And I'll throw out the same criticism to every so-called alternative presidential candidate, starting with Bobby Kennedy Jr., who laid out an economics plan, and I'm like one step away from the guy who's running his campaign, who knows all the information I do, but they don't want to be able to lay it out because they're hiding something too. And I can tell you right now that they know exactly what I'm telling you that's going on at the Federal Reserve, but they don't want to bring it full circle because they're trying to freaking basically, I don't know, bottom feed off of the Trump supporters that are going to go somewhere else once Trump gets taken down. Or maybe they'll have a ticket with Bobby and Trump, which is a possibility. But, I don't want to go that far into that detail. But then I'll also be critical of Cornel West. Cornel West is one of the smartest human beings I've ever come across. I think his analysis, I think his poetry, I think his, humanism, his brilliance, his contextualization is quite frankly jazz, just like he always promulgates. But the problem is when he starts talking about systemic predation and the impacts on the African American community, he doesn't know the details, which is incredible to me because he's such an incredibly smart guy. But like everybody else, unless they're getting it from information within their accepted sector, he's not going to slow down and take the time to learn. And nobody wants to kind of learn anything, to be honest with you. Nobody wants to know anything because everybody thinks they know everything, but they don't know shit. And then ultimately, Marianne Williamson, who knows what she's all about. But if you think, a vote for Biden is to save democracy, you're an idiot. We don't have a democracy. We have a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to fuel the mafiocracy that is creating fascism. And so what have I done? So for 13 years, I went on this odyssey. It feels like, yeah, I went to the desert and beyond and got crushed in all of the other sort of biblical sort of, references and parables and passages to be able to discover this information. And what did I discover? Well, I discovered exactly how power operates. And what is power? Well, power in our country is money, but you've got to understand, what do we all consume, right? We got to consume things to be able to survive. Unless, of course, you're one of these incredibly, go-getters that can go out and literally build your own house, get your own food, provide your own clothing, find a place for your own water, and I guess you can sustain yourself if you want to live that life. Most of us don't have that ability, nor do we have that sort of tenacity or commitment. Most of us have to live within society. And so what is society? Society is predicated on, in our society, separation of powers, liberty and justice for all, the integrity of law, and being able to hold power to account. Because if you don't hold power to account, and this is the whole thing about the founders saying it's a great system if you can keep it, because they were like, when in history has power not overwhelmed humanity's, people's ability to live genuinely free through liberty? Because it takes a lot of strong people and heart and fortitude to be able to hold power to account. Because it's easier to grift and create complicity in verticals, and that's what bullies have done on the schoolyard forever. Hey, get in line, serve me, and if you get against me, then I'm going to make your life miserable, and I'm going to, if you stand alone, I'm going to make your life miserable, and I'm going to make, I'm going to make an example of you. And then, of course, they use this language like it's like, for all of the heroes and the, truth sayers within companies and everything else, or within some sort of vertical that has some sort of connectivity to the mob or people within the mob, the whole lexicon is, oh yeah, that guy ratted us out. And even people of good meaning and stature and professionals in society every once in a while use that term. Yeah, like somebody, was the rat. Well, what the fuck are you talking about? The rats and the cockroaches are the complicit bastards in the system that all do what the bad guy is telling them to do, even though they should know better. Just like going back to the goddamn schoolyard when somebody's getting punked or, destroyed, and everybody sits on the sidelines and watch because they don't want that to be them. And so that they pretend like, look, they're not going to rock the boat, right? Let the bully have his way and then, move on. I wasn't born that way. I'm not that guy. I was the guy that when the bullies came after anybody, I made a freaking, I took an opportunity to do the beatdown. And it was amazing how many times I learned how easy it is to knock down bullies. That's what I learned on the schoolyard. I carried it through high school. I carried it through my whole life. And then, of course, now I'm 54 years old. It's part of my DNA. But now I'm doing it at a much more, intellectually, understanding of the whole and what we are and what we're supposed to do and what we're not and all of the hypocrisy and duplicity that's involved. And I'm just trying to bring out of all of you, I'm trying to inspire in you based on our work, what we've done, that the entirety of media and government and the calamitous betrayal of the system, particularly our legal system, circle the wagons to basically prop up the rich. And what we've done since our financial sector set everybody up on this global, conveyor belt of fraud, and they defrauded the United States of America through everything we show you in the con. And by the way, I will point out that it cost $4.5 million over the course of a decade to get this information all together and put it on a platinum platter that we're now offering you for free. Why? Because we got shut down by the system, this Borg. Everybody in control is feeding from the system. BlackRock owns everything, particularly media. And BlackRock got him put into position by exactly what it is that I'm telling you. And so we do not have the mechanics of the law. Yeah, am I in battlement with MAGA and fighting hatred and fascism and the corruption that births it? Oh, you bet your ass I am. But you know what? Donald Trump is low-hanging fruit. And the government's going to do it, and they're going to take him down, and thank God. But that's not going to resurrect democracy or the American dream or prove that suddenly the integrity of law works again for a country of by and for the people. Who the fuck is, it's so funny. My mind is going to the CEO of Lehman Brothers, Dick Fuld, and that's who I was about to pronounce. Dick Fuld was like, the story 13 years ago, and now I meant to say Larry Fink. Yeah, Larry Fink. Who's Larry Fink? He's the CEO of the most powerful company in the world. They're not the only ones. There's 3 of them up there at this level that are all asset managers. But BlackRock is the big one, and Larry Fink basically rules the world, or at least the United States. And did you vote for Larry Fink? No, you didn't. Do you know who Larry Fink is? You probably don't. Do you know how BlackRock and Larry Fink came to be? I don't think you do. And most of you don't. Well, they did because of the story that it is that I'm revealing to you, which is the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that blew up the world. And what we did, and this is, get ready, hang on to your hats, play the freaking drums like Christian Bale in The Big Short. You know what the ultimate truth is? This is the ultimate truth, that the Federal Reserve moved into position, did a smoke and mirror scenario because Congress was trying to make believe that they were going to save the world and the imploding global economy through a thing that they called TARP back in 2008, the Troubled Assets Relief Program, where the lexicon behind the scenes and all of the verbiage was, yeah, we have got to be able to buy the toxic assets. The toxic assets that the fucking banks created based on all of these fucking deceptive acts and practices and liars' loans of defrauding not only the United States, but the fucking world through control fraud that was emanating from the goddamn CEOs who fancy themselves kings far above the law because they operate with impunity because they know how the system works. It's called smash and grab. So they blew up the middle class over 4 decades of neoliberalism. We put it all after 9/11 into a housing bubble. The housing bubble blows up. It blew up the world because it was a $4.6 trillion, scam, grift that turned into an $800 trillion monstrosity that then when everybody goes sideways and they destroy communities and countries and pensions and everything else around the world, what does the Federal Reserve do? Well, as Congress is talking about, which was everybody got slack-jawed in the media and everybody else, like, oh my God, they're going to spend $700 billion to do what? Buy toxic assets? What are the toxic assets? Nobody knew. Well, it was the story is that, Wall Street created the toxic assets, and that's how they blew up the world. And they did it intentionally after everything that we show you, not just in the con, but in a podcast that I did called The Real Untouchables, The New Untouchables. That's you can just check it out on Google through the Real Progressives. It's called The New Untouchables, okay? So The Con, The New Untouchables, Patrick Lovell, Truth Bonds, The Con on YouTube and on TikTok, giving you all of this information, but it's coming to a head and it's getting more and more crystal clear that you've got to understand that this whole like Machiavellian circus is to prevent you from knowing that you don't live in a democracy, that the law isn't equal, that you've been betrayed and destroyed, which you're all mostly kind of intuitive about because you all know the system is rigged. But this is the details of who did what, when, and how to cover it up, that the government, the sum total of the Department of Justice and the FBI and the SEC and all of these other apparatuses of regulation like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, operate to the tune of $90 billion a year, and they've got tens of thousands of employees, and they couldn't do what I did. That I spent $4.5 million to achieve, to cross the T's and dot the I's, only to have BlackRock cover this up, and I'm the only guy speaking the goddamn truth. Because I'm the only guy who's got the balls to go the fucking distance on behalf of liberty and justice for all. Why? Why am I the only guy? Where are the millions of you? That's the question. Where are the millions of you? And so here's the situation. You've got all these people out there, that aren't MAGAs. Let's just talk about all the silos in the so-called left or the progressive square. People have got issues. What's up with the fucking gun situation, right? I mean, that's always a big problem. And then we're dealing with, the climate existential crisis that, we're all in deep, deep, deep shit if we don't get a hold of that. But that's all connected to this. Same with systemic problems in the economy. Same with the systemic situations in our prisons, all of which has created the new tyranny. Right? Because what we did in the aftermath of 2008, when the Federal Reserve did this backdoor, when the government and the media sold us on the fact that it was going to be $700 billion to buy toxic assets through the Troubled Assets Relief Program, lo and behold, the federal government, through the Federal Reserve, through what's known as Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is known as the lender of last resort capacity, was able to right the ship because they were able to say, here's $30 trillion, Wall Street. Here's $30 trillion for blowing up the fucking world and the golden goose and the American dream and the integrity of the law and everything else. Here's $30 trillion. Help yourselves to whatever the fuck you want. Double down, triple down. Nobody's going to ask any questions. Nobody sees this guy Patrick Lovell coming. We'll be able to subdue him. We'll be able to destroy him. We'll be able to make sure that his wife wants to bail because she can't handle it, and everything else and domestically that comes from, trying to carry the fucking burden of truth on your shoulders to the world that nobody's hearing because they can't see the forest for the fucking trees. Why? Because media and the establishment and everybody else has prevented you from knowing this whole situation. And what do? Again, they gave $30 trillion, and that's just an emergency apparatus packages that they were able to pay back because of all sorts of ways that finance is able to do this. But ultimately, they provided quantitative easing also. Quantitative easing is where they bought the so-called assets off the banks of the books to be able to let the banks get liquid again and start, to reshuffle the deck for the economy, which they did. Over and over and over. We gave another $22 trillion in 2019 to backstop a repo run globally that emanated out of the SoftBank in Japan. Then we've got, everything that happened during COVID. And then we did, 13 years of just free money for the rich. That's what it was. We gave trillions of dollars to billionaires and multinationals to double down, to own the freaking government and the courts, that ultimately, what we find out in our story, post-national mortgage settlement and all of the fucking civil settlements that the Holder Department of Justice used to smoke and mirrors to be able to say, hey, look, we held Wall Street accountable because they got paid, they got rocked with $250 billion in fines, but with no criminal convictions. Nobody in the country knew exactly what happened, and we gave them trillions upon trillions of dollars to do what? Exactly. The same thing. We've got a commercial real estate bubble that the likes we've never seen in this country, except for, of course, probably percentage-wise, going back to the savings and loan crisis, which incidentally, that's the first time that we ever saw Larry Fink in the mix, because Larry Fink was the guy in charge of what we called Resolution Trust to clean up what happened during the S&L crisis, which was the first act of what ultimately became the third act of the great financial crisis, and it's never ended. This is like Groundhog Day. We've been living the same lie for 20 plus years. The law is not equal. The country is not equal. The only, in my opinion, the only crime that actually has consequence in the United States is poverty. If you don't have the ability to protect yourself or fight through it or pay off whatever the fuck's going on, you're garbage. And you're in the landfill. Meanwhile, we keep playing this thing over and over and over, and the people that should be the most ardently inspired to fight for their justice, because I've given them the information on a platinum platter that proves what happened to them, most of them have gone over to Trump. Most of them have gone over to Trump and be like, oh yeah, hey, let's celebrate Trump because he's against the system. But you can't be against corruption and for Trump. As you can see, the government's demonstrating exactly what Trump did is illegal. But then, of course, they ignored it as it relates to what Wall Street did that buried at least 50 million Americans, tens of millions around the world. They then gave tens of trillions of dollars to the fucking system that did it. And here we are in the great calamity, okay? And it's a death spiral. And I'm trying to pull us out because I've got the answers. And all of this is salvageable because it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. We, the people, have got to meet and understand what the facts are, which are in www.thecon.tv, which is now free, which we spent $4.5 million to create, and we couldn't get it through the normal channels because nobody who deals with BlackRock is going to let us tell the truth about where all of these systems get their financing from. And by the way, your taxes don't go to pay for most of the stuff that the government actually greenlights. Okay? That's a whole nother part of this whole thing. And quite frankly, in a lesser sort of analogy, your subscription doesn't necessarily pay for all of the content that Netflix and HBO and all the rest of them are producing. And by the way, HBO passed on us back in the day, and I'll use this as an example. HBO now has an infomercial of Donald Trump in what was the gold standard that Schill and Evans built with Nancy Abraham, but now it's you got an infomercial of Trump on HBO as a part of a documentary? Are you kidding me? A guy that has been indicted and got the entire apparatus of the United States legal system, telling us that he was involved or the ringleader of a conspiracy to defraud the United States? And there's so much more. Okay? If I haven't moved you yet, I've got to find a way to wake you up. And fuck Ron DeSantis and his war on woke. You know why? Because Ron DeSantis is also basically owned by Bank of America, and he used the Supreme Court of Florida to bury all of this stuff just like everybody else did. So he's as corrupt as they get. If you actually ask questions, you can't figure out, if you don't ask questions, you can't figure out the corruption. And that's what guys and authoritarians and assholes that are betraying everything that we are, that allow Nazis to go in front of Walt Disney World. Are you kidding me? But it's funny for anybody from Hollywood because they used to call Disney Mauschwitz because of its corporate structure. By the way, we're not a democracy and we're not free markets. There's nothing free about this. Capitalism it has risk reward. There's no risk in the system. I'm telling you that. This is all monopoly, and it's control, and it's tyranny. So I'm going to summarize it like this. Look, man, I am trying desperately to get you to watch The Con, but also to consider investing $13 in a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. I'm a producer. I've got all the answers. I've got even more answers than I've told you in the sum total of a year and a half of truth bombs that are sitting on the shelf that I got to put into play. And the way I want to do it is I want to build the podcast to get all the right people to get this information over and over and over with, more importantly, to be honest with you, the algorithm specialist that can break through all of this nonsense to put me on par with the millions of audience like Joe Rogan or Russell Brand who aren't telling you this stuff, who are just clickbait for MAGA. They're hiding this stuff too, even though, Joe Rogan acted as if he was going to try to tell all these stories. In fact, he did, until he probably got corrupted when he got a $100 million deal on Spotify and everybody that's in his campus. He's not asking the ultimate questions that he was back in the day. I mean, he kind of is. He's still a good guy, in my opinion, minus all of the other crazy things that are involved. But I could go on and on and on. But the bottom line is nobody is telling you the truth. I've got the truth that buried tens of millions of people and gave tens of trillions of dollars to the criminal apparatus that buried the fucking world and who has complete control of the goddamn country. I'm in the midst and I'm living every single day. It feels like Groundhog Day. I don't know if you're a fan of Game of Thrones. I am. My favorite episode of all times, but it just makes me nuts every time I see it, and I have dreams about it. But it was the Battle of the Bastards. Because I constantly feel, because of all this misinformation and deception and everything that keeps, pile driving people's heads, that we're in this almost like this mass and turmoil, and I'm in this middle trying to freaking emerge with the truth to be able to change everything. And quite frankly, to mix metaphors with the whole situation with Game of Thrones is break the fucking wheel, just like Daenerys did. The combination, right? And I don't want to get stabbed in the back with the people that I've got. We have got an opportunity that if we basically break through this lethargy and this membrane where everybody is like this lobotomized zombie, and we turn on your brain to understand the way the system is supposed to work versus the way it's working exactly for the power, so that we the people can rise in unison to rip the control away from the corrupt and return it to a government of, by, and for the people, which shall not perish from the earth. So the second aspect of this is I'm trying to create a Lollapalooza tour where we go on tour around the United States, where I bring this multimedia message to the millions of people that need to see it in their face so we can all get together. And I look at it like a Lollapalooza-like situation, because we got to get all of the people that want to end and eradicate systemic racism in prison, alongside all of the people that want to end, the climate problem. And I'll put this into perspective this way too. Look, man, we have all of the technology to reboot our energy infrastructure, and it's just energy. We don't have to have emissions that create this fucking conundrum of this global warming that destroys the ecosystem and the ability for life to thrive on this planet. We don't have to do that. We have enough resources and technology to be able to rebuild the grid, to be able to utilize all of the renewable sources. And this would be such a giant project that we would create jobs and value and an opportunity for a sustainable, growth model for at least another 4 decades. And then we'd have to get on to the next thing, and we'd figure out those problems downstream. Life is constantly trying to figure out problems. We could do that if we broke through this scenario. And if you got to put this all on a continuum, everything from 9/11 through 2008 through COVID, and I don't pretend to be an expert in vaccines and all the rest of it, even though I know during COVID what happened with the Fed and all the financial apparatus of this that gave tens of trillions of more dollars to the top 1%, and then it created bullshit, lies and deception in the real estate market and the FIRE sector, which is the financial insurance real estate sector, which owns this goddamn country, which isn't sustainable, and it's not the real economy. It's all make-believe, grift, topia for the guys that are in control. We've got to break the iron grip of corruption, to break the wheel, to create a dynamic, thriving dynamism that is going to change the world. And so this is the dark ages. And ultimately, if we can create this revolution, it'll create the Renaissance. And the only way we're going to do that is with the facts. That's the only way. And so to do the final close, look, I'm looking for you to invest $13 in this situation, because billionaires spend billions to loot trillions. And we spent $4.5 million already, which means that 357,000 of you would have to contribute $13 to match what we've already done to get the $29 trillion truth, which is now the $70 trillion truth, which is your master. Which is the greatest trick the devil ever played, was to convince the world it didn't exist, because they're pissing on your head telling you it's rain, because you're a new fool in the fool circus. The truth will set you free. What I am leading is a exodus from corruption to create and I don't know why I've had a problem with this. I keep saying redemption, but the resurrection of the American dream. But you've got to have skin in the game, because if you don't have skin in the game, as we've seen demonstrated throughout social media, you're the product. You're manipulated. We're all being manipulated. But the truth can break through if the millions of us who aren't idiots overcome the lies and the noise to overcome the deception racket. And that's what we have to do. And if you can't pay $13, will you please share? Will you please subscribe? Will you please watch our work for free? Reach out to me, ask me questions, become a soldier for truth. And so that we can start to pile drive this. We're running out of time. We're on the proverbial planes flying towards the World Trade Center. And I'm trying to give you the information that if we don't take over the cockpit and get control of the planes, we're all fucking toast. That's what we're in the midst of. And I'll say this from a standpoint that I said at the very beginning. I am an anti-fascist to the core. I hate Nazis. I hate the idea of any type of tyranny, but particularly fascism. And so corruption births and fuels fascism, because it's so easy to bull people into submission. It's so easy to say, hey, if you look like us, if you're part of our church, do what we say, get in line, give us money, let this guy who's against everything that you stand for get away with murder, because you know what? The other guys are the problem. And you hate the other guys anyway. And we're not that stupid. I know that there's so many good, genuine white people that are not Nazis. Of course, we got to all come together. This has been the challenge of the United States from day one, but it can't be an identity politics circus. It has to be based on the corruption of the economy, first and foremost, above everything else. And everything else falls from there. Our dependence on fossil fuel, all of the things that come with the military-industrial complex, and all of the money in the hands for the few that they raped and pillaged us like crazy. It's a smash and grab. It's what the English Empire had done throughout its 300 years of prominence when it went all around the world. And it basically got corrupt leaders to basically do the deals that the English government lent them money in pounds, become the global currency because everybody wanted pounds. And then ultimately, when they locked them up in bankruptcy, they were able to get all the power and take all of their, loot all of their natural resources, which is genius. A small island of very motivated men that were on the same page were able to outsmart the entire fucking planet until the United States came around and said, fuck you. Fuck you and your tyranny. Patrick Adams said, give me liberty or give me death. Yeah. Where is the revolutionary zeal of American patriots who believe in liberty and justice for all, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And everybody gets a shot at the American dream, but only when you hold power to account, because otherwise you end up with tyranny, autocracy, dictatorships, whatever the fuck it is, to where these guys betray us all. So if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi comes together and merges it in unity because we champion dignity, integrity, decency, beauty, sustainability, liberty, if we merge in unity, we will rise to defeat the tyranny of misery. And this is all in service to the Clean New Deal. No presidential election is going to give you this shit. Presidential candidate, they're not going to do it. I've seen it too close to the situation. They just can't do it. They're not going to do it. They don't know what's going on. I try to make these things like 10 minutes long. They turn into an hour sometimes. But if you follow this far, the whole world depends on us getting it right. We have the opportunity to smash through the forces of evil to basically generate justice. This is the age-old thing. It's light versus dark. This is the torch of truth. We have to overcome the betrayal and deception of lies. And Donald Trump, if you're a MAGA, is not your friend. He'll piss on your head all day long and tell you that he needs you, but he'd throw you in the garbage just as long as he see you. Are you kidding me? Who buys into Donald Trump actually caring about them? Are you kidding? And then he's fighting for you and dying for your sins and all that kind of Jesus Christ superfluous bullshit? Yeah, whatever. Look, man, there was over 100 million victims of the 2008 great financial crisis. There's probably tens of millions or more throughout the entirety of what's gone on since then. The long and the short of it is, if we got 13%, and I say that because I'm trying to do this in honor of the original 13 colonies that had the wherewithal to rise and confront and defeat the enemies of liberty by defeating tyranny, because they created, in order to form a more perfect union and a Bill of Rights for all their flaws and the separation of powers, which is a brilliant scheme if you can keep it, just like Thomas Jefferson said. And just like Abraham Lincoln proved it, and just like Teddy Roosevelt proved it, just like FDR proved it, and just like Kennedy proved it until the CIA got him, right? And what have we been living with since? I think the CIA has been in control probably, at least to a degree, because where do they come from? Sullivan and Cromwell. Oh, by the way, guess who worked out the deal for the $29 trillion backdoor from the Federal Reserve? Sullivan and Cromwell. It's not that complicated. I've got the truth that can blow this whole system up, but I need millions of you to come on board. If we were able to get somewhere in the vicinity of 13% of what I know the number of the victims of this whole thing are, we'd be able to generate $169 million to do the Lollapalooza deal, to do the podcast, to break through this entirety of this lying, deceptive racket of mainstream media. And by the way, I'll finish with this too for you to think about, right? I don't know if I said this earlier because I've said a lot, but literally, I can't stand, and I detest MAGAs. This sort of, we all think that they're in a cult, right? And yet they're all about Donald Trump because he can do no wrong, even though that's all he ever has done. And he's such a fool. It's unbelievable. I don't think this is about Donald Trump. I think this was about the Tea Party and white supremacy all the way back through the Jim Birch Society that found just a lackey in Trump that did their bidding. He tells people what they want to know, but it brought them all together, and they're very, on the same page, and they march to the same tune, and they're very organized, and they're extremely well funded, which is the most important part of all of this stuff. Remember what I said: billionaires spend billions to loot trillions because they're all socialists, really. That's it. That's funny. Isn't that fucking ironic? And then, what was I going to say? I already did the 357,000, the 13, what we could do, 169 million. We do, oh yeah, this is what I was going to say, right? This is all in service of the Clean New Deal, because this is what I've been all about for 13 years. Who's in control? Who has the power? Well, it's certainly not you and me, right? The Congress and government doesn't give a shit about what's important to us. That's been proved time and time again. They are chameleon, duplicitous rat bastards that work for the people that give them the money. So again, if you're not invested, you're getting played. And who's going to come up with the freaking grand symphony to be able to break us out of this whole juggernaut? I am. Do I walk on water? Did I part the Red Sea? No, I did the fucking work, and I did it with guys much, much smarter than I am. I just asked the right questions, but then I got the whole goddamn thing, and it's available for free, www.thecon.tv, $13 for liberty, and ultimately we come together. We'll get this, we'll get this show on the road for the clean new deal. Am I running for president? No. Did Martin Luther King run for president? No, I'm not Martin Luther King, but I've got the answers given the spectrum of the problems that we're facing to be able to break the juggernaut of deception and betrayal, which is tyranny. Can't you live truth? Can't you live free? Don't you want to raise the truth of the torch of liberty? Then join me. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.